regarding history that we will see through this lesson. Now we move on towards the PPT. Before starting with the lesson, we will see the objectives of the lesson or which points we are going to complete in this lesson. Tradition of historiography, modern historiography, development of scientific perspective in Europe and historiography, notable scholars. First, we would be seeing in this lesson the meaning of a historian. Historians are researchers who study and write about the past events. Their primary duties include obtaining historical data from libraries, archives, and artifacts, determining the authenticity of historical data, and teaching or researching at universities. Next point, what is the relationship between history and a historian? History is an area of knowledge, a subject taught in schools, and historians are people that work to analyze historical events. It is also very important for an historian to possess the following specific qualities: analytical skills, communication skills, problem-solving skills, research skills, and writing skills. Now we will be knowing what is historiography. It's about the writing of history and the use of historical methods. The word historiography can also refer to a body of historical work. Historiography development in the West. In this lesson, we are going to study how historiography developed in the Western countries with some notable scholars. First, it's the introduction to the lesson. It said it's a continuous process. So, I start with the introduction to the lesson. Historical research is done to understand the chronology of the past events and their interconnections. This is a continuous process. It means that the historians do research on various subjects to understand the time sequence of the past events and how they are interrelated to each other, and this is known as a continuous process, which means it will keep going for centuries and centuries. Empirical method is the laboratory method in which laws are applicable. Unlike physical and natural science, in historical research, empirical method of study cannot be used. For example, natural science, we can give the example of photosynthesis. Plants take in carbon dioxide and give out oxygen. In science, experiments are proved by using different laws which are available and which has been proved correct by some well-known scientists. But in history, we cannot prove anything using laws, experiments, and observation. Why? Because we cannot recreate past events. For example, like the events of the uprising of 1857, civil disobedience movement, and many other events related to the ancient and the medieval period. Criteria for authentication of historical document. It means there are certain principles that are laid down to verify certain documents as well as artifacts. So, here are the principles that are laid down for the historian which needs to be examined. The lettering style of the documents, the writing style of the author, manufacturing data and type of paper, stamps of authority, and many other things like this were being examined. After this, the document is further scrutinized, means examined, by a historian with the help of available historical references. Disciplines in historical research. As in natural science, we have specific subjects of knowledge. The same way in history, we have different subjects for the historians for their historical research. For example, archaeology, the one who does the excavation. Archival science means storing historical documents, letters, coins, etc. Manuscriptology means handwritten documents. Epigraphy is the study of inscription. Analysis of lettering style means finding out to which era the letter belongs to. Linguistic is the study of language. Numismatic is the study of coins. And genealogy is the study of lineage or about our ancestors, which helps us in identifying further for our medical history. Now we start with the first objective, tradition of historiography. In the tradition of historiography, the points that we will be covering is writing of critical historical narrative. So here in your textbooks, they have given the meaning of a historian as well as historiography. In the introduction, we have already studied who is a historian and what is known as historiography. So, the writing of critical historical narrative is known as historiography. A scholar who writes such a historical narrative is a historian. Next, conceptual framework means whatever data or content the historian has collected, he frames or fits it according to his own ideologies and principles. And the third, the means of communication during the ancient period. In the ancient period, the writing of historical narrative means story, was not that much very popular or widespread, but it does not mean that they were not aware of the historical time. The reason for this was lack of sources. Oral sources was the most prevalent source of that period. Ancient people also felt the need of passing on the stories of life and valor of the ancestors to the next generation. Ancient communities all over the world used various means like cave painting, storytelling, singing songs and ballads, etc. for this purpose. These traditional means are looked upon as the sources of history in the modern historiography. The next, characteristics of modern historiography. These four characteristics are very important from the exam point of view. The first, based on scientific principles. Principles are ideas based on scientific rules and laws. They are generally accepted by scientists. They are fundamental truth that are the foundation for other studies. They are more like guiding ideas that scientists use to make predictions and develop new laws by asking relevant questions. Second, anthropocentric question. It means that these questions are about the deeds of the members of ancient human societies of a particular period. History does not suggest any interrelation between divine and human deeds. It's also a part of social science which is called as anthropology. These questions relate to the brave acts done by our ancestors right from the ancient period. History says that there is no interrelation between the divine and human deeds. It also means that whatever victories our ancient kings had achieved, it is only because of their valor, courage, and determination. When the historian presents his answers to the questions, it is supported by proof or an evidence. It means that whatever achievement was achieved by human beings right from the past was presented in a form of graph. Example, we can give you the example of farming that was being done in ancient period, and we can compare to today's century, that is to the modern era. As we come towards the conclusion of modern historiography, it is said that its roots were laid down in the ancient Greek historical writings. Next, the Greek historian, we will be studying about him. Herodotus of the 5th century BC was a Greek historian known as the father of history. He was the first historian to collect his materials, systematically test their accuracy to a certain extent, and arrange them in a well-constructed and vivid narrative. His book, The Histories, describes the struggle of Greece against the mighty Persian Empire in the Persian Wars. Next objective, that is the development of scientific perspective in Europe and historiography. Philosophy and science had achieved a remarkable progress till the 18th century CE, because philosophy started examining itself as well as other matters, whereas science examined only scientific questions. People started thinking, reasoning, and finding answers to their questions by applying scientific methods. Before 18th century, the scenario in European countries was completely different. People were uneducated for their doubts and problems. They were completely dependent on the Pope and priest. Whatever solution given by them were God's words for them. They followed it very blindly. Superstition also existed during that period. Later on, when people started getting educated, their intellectual thinking also began to change. People started thinking and living for themselves, started keeping faith on scientific methods. Next point, we go towards the Göttingen University of Germany. In 1737 CE, the Göttingen University was founded in Germany, which had for the first time an independent department of history. Later on, other German universities also became centers of historical studies. Next objective we come towards the notable scholars. Many European scholars contributed their efforts in the development of historiography. Let us have a look on few notable scholars. The first one, René Descartes, 1596 to 1650. He was a French historian. René Descartes' views regarding historical documents was to verify and critically examining them. Among the rules given by him in his book, Discourse on the Method, it had a great impact on the scientific method of research. Never to accept anything for true till all grounds of doubt are excluded. It means that never to accept any of the document authentic until and unless you get answers for all your questions. Next, Voltaire. Voltaire's original name was François Maria Hériot. He was a French scholar. He expressed his opinion that along with objective truth means existing truth, and chronology of historical events considering social, traditions, trade, economy, agriculture, conditions of the people was also equally important in historiography. It gave rise to the thought that Understanding all aspects of human life is important for history writing. Thus, it is said that Voltaire was the founder of modern historiography. Next, George William Friedrich Hegel, 1770 to 1831, was a German philosopher who developed a dialectical scheme which that emphasized the progress of history and of ideas from thesis to antithesis, and then the combination of both arrives to synthesis. Hegel was of the opinion that historical reality should be presented in a logical manner, means from scientific point of view. Timeline of historical events also played a very important role in pointing towards progress of history. It means history is a way of representing human progress. Historical methods were not of lesser quality, though they differed from scientific methods. Collection of his lectures and articles is published in a book entitled Encyclopedia of Philosophical Science, and the next, his book Reason in History, is well known. Leopold von Ranke, 1795 to 1886. He belonged to Berlin University, and his thoughts regarding historiography were greatly influenced in the 19th century. He emphasized on gathering original documents rather than on imaginative narration of history. He insisted on verifying the documents related to historical events with utmost care, so that it was possible to reach the historical truth. Collection of his articles is published in two books, The Theory and Practice of History and The Secret of World History. Next, Karl Marx, 1818 to 1883. He was a German scholar. He belonged to Germany. Towards the end of the 19th century, a new school of thought arose, keeping in view the new thesis formulated by Karl Marx. Karl Marx was towards communism. He stated that history was not about abstract ideas, it was about living people. His views were that human societies develop through class conflict. This happens because the capitalists control the means of production, and the working classes that enables these means by selling their profit in return for wages to the capitalist, and this gives rise to inequality in the society. His best known titles are the 1848 pamphlet, the Communist Manifesto, and the 3-volume, Thus Capital. Michael Foucault, 1926 to 1984, he was a French historian of the 20th century who brought forth a new concept in historiography. He, in his book, Archaeology of Knowledge, was against the practice of arranging historical events in a chronological order. He focused on explaining various transitions in the past rather than reaching the ultimate historical truth. He tried to bring into attention the unacknowledged areas by historians such as psychological disorders, science of medicine, prison administration, etc. Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir was one of the feminist European historian who helped in establishing the fundamentals of feminism. The feminist historiography emphasized not only on the inclusion of women in history, but also on the rethinking of the male dominated perspective of history. Over a significant period of time, mainly male scholars were involved in the writing of Indian history. As a result, the role and achievement of women in history remained neglected. To highlight this fact was a major task faced by the feminist historians. Among Indian women authors writing about women in the 19th century CE was Tarabai Shinde was the foremost one. Annals School, it was been established by Lucien Febvre and Marc Bloch. Its roots were in the journal Annals, Economy, Society, Civilization. The Annals School promoted a new form of history, replacing the study of readers with the lives of ordinary people and replacing examination of politics, diplomacy, and wars with inquiries into climate, demography, agriculture, commerce, technology, transportation, and communication, as well as social groups and mentalities. While aiming at a total history, it also yielded dazzling micro-studies of villages and regions. Its international influence on historiography has been enormous. So students, in your textbook, they have given us boxes as the heading, do you know? So on page number 2, the first box that we will be going through, it's related to the Louvre Museum, the earliest inscription in the Louvre Museum. The above picture shows a fragment of the earliest inscription. A forward marching pile of soldiers holding shields and spears is shown in that picture, and the general is in the front. The tradition of recording historical event can be traced back to the Summer civilization in Mesopotamia. Names of Sumerian kings and the stories of battles fought by them have been preserved in various inscriptions. The earliest inscription shown above dates back to 4500 BCE. It records a battle fought between two kingdoms. It is now displayed at the Louvre Museum in France. So students, the boxes are really very important. They might ask you questions related to these boxes, so do it thoroughly. Now we move on to the second box. According to Hegel, grasping the meaning of any event happens in terms of two direct opposites. Human mind cannot understand the true nature of that event without understanding the opposites. For example, true, false, good, bad, etc. In order to understand the true nature of a thing, one needs to know both true and false, similarly, what is good and bad. This method of analysis, which is based on opposites, is known as dialectics. In this method, a theory is proposed at the beginning, which is called thesis. Then another theory is proposed, which is contrary to the thesis. It is called antithesis. After a thorough logical discussion of the both, a new thesis is proposed, which includes the gist of both. the thesis and the antithesis. And when we combine both the thesis and the antithesis, a new thesis is developed and it is called as synthesis. So this is very important. So students, now we come towards a conclusion of the lesson. In this way, the scope of historiography kept continuously expanding. Writing of histories of various subjects like literature, architecture, sculpture, dramas, drawing and painting, music, films, etc. came into process. Thank you.